first of all, I'll stand for 2 seconds.
Okay.
I got to do my welcome. Welcome to New York, which the very thing that brought most of you here is illegal in this state. Maybe you are here to partner in some way with an iGaming company, invest in it, create content, sell a product to it. Maybe you're an iGaming operator. All of that is illegal activity in this state, as it is in 43, I guess, other states. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a quick pause and await the New York State Gaming Commission come down here and shut down our operation. May take them a little while. They're in Schenectady, New York, so it takes some time. But what I'm going to do while we wait for that is show you the absurdity of this, because illegal doesn't mean it's not happening. All of you will know this. So if you are MGM, which is located a few miles north, if you're Resorts World, which is a few miles east, you cannot offer online casino gaming. But if you're any one of hundreds of offshore online gaming platforms, you can grab your cell phone right now and play casino games to your heart's content. So I just happen to have one up here that I am registered to use. I can start with a $3,750 casino welcome bonus. I have slots. I have table games. I can play in crypto, play with crypto. Not sure anybody else can do that unless you're illegal. And this is my favorite, really, because it's my favorite game, is the live dealer, play against a live dealer. So you could right now, if you get bored with our little presentation here, can't blame you. You can take out your phone and play blackjack early playout with Anderson, blackjack with Gypsy. I think I might know her, actually. Blackjack with Africa, and it goes on and on. So, this is what the reality is of what is happening in the marketplace, is that you have a robust illegal gaming market. And in some ways, this is our best argument for legal iGaming, is that you have a vast, unregulated, untaxed market taking place, which is very unfair to the licensed operators that are in any given state. The problem is that has not been the most compelling argument to date because the industry hasn't had a lot of data to deal with. So one of the first things we're going to talk about today, and I'll introduce my guest in a moment, is what really is this market and how does it differ from the legal market? I'll give you 3 data points that we'll come back to, just keep in your mind. The first one is $337 billion. The second one is 580,000. And the third one is 0. So see if you can pick up those numbers as we go, and then you get a little bonus promotion at the end of the day for your iGaming. So let's say hello to Cait DeBaun. Cait DeBaun is the Vice President of Communications and also works in responsible gaming for the American Gaming Association. Now, I've been involved in this industry for a few years, and the AGA, which may not be that familiar to some of you that are not from the States, is really a revitalized organization under the leadership of Bill Miller, and has really taken a significant role, I think, in the last 4 years as the voice of the industry. So the first thing I really want to ask you, Cait, is just a little background on AGA and what they're doing these days, and then we'll get into the heart of our conversation on illegal gaming.
Starting with the hard questions. The American Gaming Association is the trade industry voice for the casino gaming industry here in the U.S., and that's the breadth and depth of the industry. So online and brick and mortar, supplier, operator, retail, brick and mortar, we're tribal and commercial. We exist to create a policy and business environment for casino gaming to thrive. And we do that in a number of ways. Some of it is, in DC and making sure our voice is heard, and some of it is educating state regulators, state policymakers as they consider these issues. We produce a lot of research, which we'll talk about in a minute. And right now, our 2 core priorities are stopping illegal gambling here in the U.S. and elevating responsible gambling, and those 2 things really align well.
So, up until last year, we'd go out to states when we were making the case for legalizing iGaming, and we would talk about the illegal market. We came up with the idea of show them what's actually happening in their own state, like I just did with you, and they are surprised by that. And the next question they ask is, well, what's the size of this market? What are we really dealing with here? Turns out to be a very hard number to come up with. And AGA, I guess it was just last year, right, did the research on this and came up with what I'm aware of is the first ever report on the size of the illegal gaming market in the U.S., and it included both online gaming as well as land-based gaming, and put those numbers together. So we'll break that down a little bit, but you want to give us an overview of that work and that report, I think would be very useful.
Sure. So, Howard, as you said, we can talk about illegal gambling, and we have for many years. When we were leading up to PASPA, it was a key conversation point that this is already happening. The idea that people aren't betting on sports because there is an illegal market is just silly, and it's the same conversation we're having today with iGaming. But as the U.S. paved the way for states to legalize sports betting, we saw that momentum in 2018, 19, 20 into 2021. The next part of that conversation is, well, we're creating this thriving marketplace. We're going through the licensure process. We're paying the taxes. We're paying the licensure fees. We're providing consumer protections. Or if you think of all of the work that was just mentioned in the panel before this about compliance, that costs a lot of money, and that's an investment we make as a legal regulated industry. So we wanted to, start this conversation about illegal gambling, that it's time for, law enforcement, for policymakers to understand the impact of not going after illegal markets. But you can talk about that as this kind of, abstract thing, and we wanted to really paint a target. So David Foreman, who leads our research, led a really rigorous process with our research partners to define what does illegal sports betting look like today, what does illegal iGaming look like today, what does skill gaming look like today, and for those of you, not familiar with the U.S. market, skill-based gaming is something that is rampant in many states, and it's where these quote-unquote skill machines are in gas stations, convenience stores, et cetera, et cetera. So in total, our research showed that there's Americans wager $511 billion annually with illegal marketplaces, and the smallest of those is sports betting, which is no surprise given the transition of millions of Americans into the protections of the legal regulated marketplace. And then you have skill machines, which comes in around just north of $100 billion in wagering, and then the largest of them, which I don't think would be surprising given the state of legalization, is iGaming, which comes in at $330 billion and change, or $337 billion. So it was really eye-opening and a great way to not only talk, as Howard goes to state houses to talk about this, but as we engage the federal government in their role to take out illegal gambling.
So, it's pretty astounding, right? Their research shows $337 billion of illegal wagering taking place on online markets at a time when only 7 states, and really only as of this week, 7 states, it was 6 states till about yesterday, have legalized online gaming at this point. So we finally have a number. It's a huge number. I'll just say as an aside on the skill games, and my company does both land-based as well as iGaming, so that the illegal competition on the land-based side is also very important, and that's the number I mentioned earlier, 580,000 illegal, essentially slot-type machines that are skill games are estimated to be in the U.S. states based on the work of the AGA. So you can see the frustration of legal operators who are fighting this battle on both the online side and the skill game side. The skill game side is somewhat tangible. You can see a machine. You can trace where it came from. On the offshore side, especially with the addition of cryptocurrency, it is very difficult to follow the thread and do any enforcement on illegal online gaming. And this puts the legal operators in a very tough position, which is if it's prevalent everywhere illegally, I'm following all these rules. What's the incentive system for us to follow the rules? Well, you might lose your license. Well, the guys that are not licensed are making money hand over fist, and they really have no deterrent at this point. If you are not an operator in the U.S., if you work for a company, this is what I want you to think about. If you are in partnership with companies that are providing content to illegal markets and even gray markets, or you're in partnership in any way, right now you don't see any disincentive for doing that business. The real question is, what happens in the US going forward? You've started to see some signs of this abroad. There was I won't mention the name of the company, but a big action in the UK last year at the end of the year, a deferred prosecution agreement with a major company that said to the company, you must leave all unregulated markets or you will not be able to do business in the UK. If there's one thing we know in the US, we see many, and you saw this in responsible gaming as well, you see many of the enforcement mechanisms make their way to the US a little bit later because our market is not as mature here. So as you think forward, you want to think through, where am I doing business now? What will this mean in the US going forward? So in that transition, I want to talk a little bit about enforcement today and what that picture looks like. You at the AGA, who work out of Washington, I know have been very assertive since you issued the report in Congress and in the Department of Justice. And just give us a sense of what's happening in those areas, and we'll come back to that in a second.
Sure. So part of the research we did was not just how much Americans are wagering, but what does that cost the legal regulated industry? And it's to the tune of $44 billion. And the thing is, it's not just about us, because gambling in the U.S. is a key driver of tax dollars for states across the country. We're a top 5, 10 taxpayer in most states in which we operate, and it costs state governments $14 billion in taxes across these verticals. And so we took this information and used it to paint this target on the back of the illegal marketplace. And we started this knowing full well it wasn't going to be an overnight thing. It wasn't like we were going to write a letter to the Attorney General of the US and say, illegal gambling is the thing you should go after. And they flip a switch, and here we are, it's solved the problem. It's something that we're chipping away at year over year by building a coalition of voices and leveraging the reach of different stakeholders. So it's engaging with the FBI to talk to them about how crypto is used in offshore marketplaces and what that means to the financial security of the U.S. economy. It's talking to the U.S. attorneys. We wrote a letter to every U.S. attorney in the country to say, you have a role to play in this. There's illegal activity happening, and here's how it's harming communities across the country. And by the way, to the point we've made already, we go through this strict process to follow the rules. What other industry is there that, they play by the rules but aren't protected and don't have their commitments and investments protected by law enforcement? And so it's really first that raising the awareness and then the education about the role you can play. And we've also, we have a great relationship with regulators here in the U.S. and have seen some great action previously. Dave Rebuck and the DGE have been leaders in this space for a long time. And so over the last year, one of the focus areas for us has been, here are the things that you as a state regulator can do to make a difference. And we've seen a lot of action over the last, say, 6 months in this space in Michigan, Ohio, New Jersey, and Florida, where there's been more kind of enforcement. And it serves a number of purposes. One, it is putting these companies on notice, but two, it allows us to go to intermediaries like Google and say, this is a business operating illegally and leveraging your platform to get to Americans, and not just Americans broadly, but also vulnerable populations. Howard showed that you can go up, open the app, start betting. There's no care for, age verification. There's no care for, where you're located, how much money you have, where your money's coming from. And so it's a matter of, we all have a role to play, and what the AGA is doing right now is going to the various stakeholders to say, here's your role, and here's the responsibility you have as a beneficiary of this broader ecosystem.
Yeah, well, let's be clear. It's the very definition of money laundering when you're playing online gaming. It's what's happening. You can't trace any of those funds. They have to be, transferred from offshore bank accounts here. You mentioned enforcement, some activity. I would just say this. It's a drop in the bucket. You've got a $340 billion market, and this is where my last data point comes from. Talked about the multi-billion market, hundreds of thousands of skill-based machines. The level of enforcement of illegal gaming in this industry right now is zero. It really is not adequate at this point to create disincentives for entities to be in the illegal market versus the legal market. And it's so expensive to be in the legal market, to create a regulated system, to comply with a regulated system, that I think it's today is sort of a discouraging signal if you're trying to do business the right way at this point in time. We have seen some efforts at the state level, which I'll talk about just for a minute or so. And this is an offshoot of the offshore problem. There's an inverse issue. And I mentioned some of you maybe are vendors or doing business and partnerships with offshore. The question is, what happens when you come to the U.S. and you are licensed by a United States state regulator, but you are doing business in a market that is itself prohibits gaming or online gaming, or it's unclear. That's the difference between gray and black. A black market, clearly illegal. Let's just stick with that for a minute. So the situation today is that when the U.S. began entering the iGaming market several years ago, there were no U.S. companies. There were no companies that were in the iGaming business here. So if you were used to doing business abroad and perhaps to some degree in illegal or questionable markets, you were the only game in town. And so those businesses have been licensed here in the U.S. And there are today businesses that are licensed in U.S. states that are doing business in some way, distributing content, vendor relationships in countries where gaming is prohibited. We've seen instances potentially in terror states, in Iran and Russia. China is obviously a good example as well. Some of the definitions are difficult, some are not so difficult, but this raises a question again for the operators that are only in legal markets. A company, for example, that's in the physical market, like ours, if we make a slot machine, a video slot machine, and we sell it to the state of Alabama, as of today at least, that's illegal because there's no gaming in Alabama. And we're going to get cracked down on by a Nevada regulator who will say you can't do that. If a company sends content into an illegal market, let's use Iran as sort of the paradigm example, that has not been subject to enforcement because the laws don't really cover it here. New York and other states, we've seen it in Iowa, Illinois, recently New Hampshire, have introduced provisions that would create a new standard that would prevent the licensing of companies doing business in those markets in the U.S. state. And we've seen some evidence that the states are starting to ask those questions. So message to you is if you're doing business with companies doing business in those markets and you've had a free ride till now, you're going to begin to see some changes, I believe, in the U.S. as this market matures. Otherwise, the big players aren't going to want to continue to be in the market. We are out of time. Join me, please, in thanking Cait DeBaun, and we're available for questions, certainly, after this session. Thank you.